All right, hey Kyle. So thanks for the call. Okay, so the what you'll see out of some of those guys is I talked about the right shoulder. So they like the right shoulder staying internal very long, which gets it very steep going up and kind of this way in transition. And then this shoulder goes from internal to external because of the rotation of the body. So if I leave the arms up here and turn, it's shallowing the club out. And that's kind of how they look at this sort of stretch shortening cycle of this arm gets stretched so that the muscle fibers react in that direction. A few things there. The other part is I kind of like this feeling of the right arm being strong and then in transition kind of shallowing out. I think that's there in a lot of great golf swings, obviously. There's some nuance to all of this stuff because, people are teaching different patterns, different ball flights, different trajectories. So they're going to have different, matchups to match those shots that they're preferring. So in terms of the rotation, think of the shoulders, ribs, belt, or shoulders, ribs, hips. The term we used a lot in terms of Mac O'Grady's stuff was that there's a body cast. Essentially from my ribs to like my mid thighs, envision this entire torso is in a body cast. So that way I'm not disassociating my hips from my upper body too much because a lot of this stuff is what you're seeing instructors teaching what they see out of like Dustin or what they see out of him hitting a really hard driver, but it's going to vary because the speed of the rotation is going to vary, and you want to be able to hit a 3/4 8-iron just as much as you want to be able to hit a hard driver, because this game's more about control than just ripping 7-irons 210 every time. So even though that's fun, you want to be able to have everything move somewhat together because there's different elements that show up, like wind, like rain, like cold, like other things. So to be the most consistent, we want to have all this stuff moving in sequence and together. So in terms of the rotation, think of my spine perpendicular to my shoulders, ribs, hips. So shoulders, ribs, hips rotating around the spine, okay? So if my spine stayed in one spot, Jack envisioned it like a spoke going down his spine, sticking out his tailbone, and going into the ground. Okay, so he's rotating around his spine with an extension from his tailbone, spoking him into the ground, turning around his spine. So basically that's all we're doing. Just turn around the spine, turn around the spine. But I'm gonna move where that tailbone is anchored in the ground based on the shot I'm hitting. So it's rotate, 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 move the tailbone to the low point, then rotate is basically what's happening. So we want to be able to turn, 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 move the anchor, and then everything turns as fast as it can, or as together as it can. So that's where that little wind up, lean, turn. Where you would see sort of the way it's being taught in what you saw today or this morning, they like to get up here, turn, keep the left side of the hip low, keep the left shoulder low, and turn. And then they get to here, and then they push everything up to extend. So I would say that this is overturned here, because they'll actually turn in the same spot here and then push forward from there. So in their circles, it's more turn, turn, push, extend. Where we would be turn, move the low point, everything turn together. So that's essentially all I'm doing. I'm taking my center, I'm winding up around it, I'm moving it to where I want the low point to be, and then I'm unraveling it. So that would be the only difference that I really see. I think that the key is that the term I use, body cast. So from mid-thigh to ribs, everything being turning together. So that the right knee, right hip, right rib, right shoulder all move together right there, right through there. So in terms of what I mentioned, the more upright golf swings, like a Nicklaus, the more I swing the club upright, the higher my hands are, okay? When I rotate with high hands, if I turn from here, everything goes out this way, if everything turned together. So that's why you'll see high hand golf swings have more linear motion in them, because they've got to hold the arms back, because if they start rotating from the top, everything gets sent out this way. So where a deeper golf swing, if I rotate from here, I don't get sent out as much. If I'm really flat and rotate, I better rotate. So that's why Nicklaus, Watson, Norman are more hands high, lateral movement, arms back in front, and then everything turns together through here. They'd have less of that look of that left hip back and right shoulder forward. They'd have more of a look of being square here, and then everything turning together from impact to finish. They'd also have hands higher, more linear motion. Because the higher my hands are, the wider things are, the more I can move this way. The more narrow things are, and the more deep things are, if I move laterally with hands deep and wrists narrow, everything's jammed up. Everything's gonna go to right field. So that's why those golf swings will rotate more to get the club back in front of them. So I think that I can only speak from my experience in terms of how I would feel the right shoulder, left hip relationship. Because it's almost like I spent a lot of time when I was building it.
10-minute calls with them.
I spent, it's a little wet here, but I spent a ton of time being this guy. So I was this guy, like down in the ground, almost feeling like over the top, because I could get way down like that way for a while. So I worked on that element to get this left hip, see if I can do it this direction, to get this left hip kind of back and this right shoulder forward. It's more like this way. So that's why you would see Palmer's, those guys swing like an S. So their golf swings were a little in, out, and around, and then whirly-birded. So we spent, when my hands were really underneath and all I could do is hit push draws and blocks, I spent a ton of time just pretending to be Palmer. So I'd hit a bunch of shots like, kind of like that, like around this way, because I wanted to be able to kind of feel that this is working back and left and then my arms fired around this way, and then kind of whirly-birded around. So I was going, in order to get this back, this left hip back and this right shoulder forward, I had to come at it like this. Now, I already had a pretty big windup in my pelvis and a pretty big windup in the entire right side of my body. So when I swing like Palmer, it's not over the top. Because I've got so much depth going back here, when I swing like Palmer, it's actually back in front of me. But if you didn't have a big windup and you were more like program 1, where we're just trying to push back like this, then your hips aren't fully wound up. Well then, if I start to swing like Palmer from a place of not being wound up in the backswing, well then I'm gonna be too over it, too out. So the checkpoint from P6 for those guys would be, you know, a lot of them are wanting it back here, coming from more in here and out that way to hit push draws. Where, you know, we see more from like a Sneed and Nicholas, their hands are a little higher, so when they come down, they want the club feeling like it's out here, out in front of them. But in a perfect world, you know, it'd be right on the hands, because it's gonna work around from here, it's gonna work around that 180-degree circle right here. So that 180-degree circle, if I start it back here, that 180-degree circle is out to right and around. That 180-degree circle from here is more around that way, so low left. Both are correct, I think. Both just create a different ball flight. So in terms of getting this left hip back, you know, if I'm going to be a high trajectory picker of the ball, like Jack, then I'm not going to want that left hip down and back, because I'm not firing anything down here. I'm firing to my low point, which is right here, if I'm going to be a high picker type. So if I'm going to hit a high Jack shot, very that way. So that golf swing was more up, down, up, less down, back, kind of Trevino. Trevino though, he's not high picker guy. He's sort of low trapper guy. So he's this way. I think you need both. I think you need to feel both, and experiment with all the feels. But that's kind of the difference of how they attack it, and we've talked about that before. But like that Trevino swing I just made, if I put that on camera, you'd see way more rotation. You'd be more here, way more forward shaft lean, a lot lower left shoulder, where Jack would be more here, a lot less rotation in the pelvis, a lot later rotation in the pelvis, because everything's working more this way. And that golf club would exit more, so like when you see the club exit out of my shoulder, the high ball hitters have it exit up here. It's very vertical. The low ball hitters have it exit more around. So kind of what I mentioned, the difference between CP and CF. So I don't know if anything in there helps you. It's just that we want the entire torso rotating together at all times. We just need the rotation to happen from the bottom of the arc. So I'm feeling wound up, bottom of the arc, rotate. Wound up, bottom of the arc, rotate. So everything's turning in a body cast from here to here. Everything's turning together. If I go slow or if I go fast. Faster I go, you see that foot slide. So the anchor out of my tailbone rotate. Wind up, move my tailbone, rotate. So the whole thing's turn, turn. I'm just changing where that axis point is. So it's wind up, move the axis point, turn. Wind up, move the axis point, turn. Wind up, move the axis point, turn. It might even feel like if you wind up proper enough that you don't even have to feel this part. Because if you wind this up enough, well enough, this part right here happens on its own. So that part you might not even need to feel anymore. Depends on what you feel. Okay, so body cast. Whether I go slow or fast. And then I want my tailbone at the bottom of the arc. Hope this helps. Thanks again.